So I think part of where we left off, one of the participants in the podcast left a comment on the last, I suppose, episode that we did.
Right?
Um, and I don't know if she is listening or watching, but if she is, I am very curious to know about your experiences being interviewed across different podcasts with different um, podcast producers and different projects. I imagine it's stressful and repetitive and possibly emotionally charged. So I'd love to hear about that because I think it's an important thing that a lot of shows don't go into for whatever reason, but the experience being a subject is a very specific one. And my hat's off to you for doing it because that cannot be easy. So if you wanted to come chat with us about your
That was
experience being a
Shauna.
subject of a podcast, or, we don't have to get into the nuts and bolts of what happened. You've definitely covered that, but just to
Well,
hear
I
about
think,
some of the legal processes and all of that too. So,
yeah, definitely. And I think Shauna has some very specific things that uh, she would like to say and put forth there, put out there, because I do feel that she, of maybe, I don't know, maybe more so than some of the other doulas, kind of didn't feel that the punishment or that sort of equaled the crime. I mean, there's just sense of like not being able to really feel validated that what went on was appropriately
right.
represented in the
And
punishment. I don't know why I'm stumbling over saying
okay. But
overthinking it, but you know exactly what I'm
yeah,
talking
I mean, I
about.
think the fear from all of the doulas was really grounded in that this is somebody who is likely to reoffend. Don't want a
Right.
spoiler alert. It does come up in the podcast, but it's also come up in the press that she did. I mean, they put her on house arrest, which does what for somebody who's scamming people online?
I know.
They've definitely handed down sentences
It's almost
restricting
it's
online
like a
activity.
gift. House arrest is a gift for someone who scams online. What?
Yeah,
How is that a
absolutely.
punishment? But that's part of what she's talking about is like there's not enough recognition about the damage done.
In the US, when it comes to, I mean, my knowledge of Canadian law is limited, but in the US, there are a couple of laws that have kind of caught up to some of this. I mean, usually it's imposed on people like, for instance, the guy who ran Silk Road or those kinds of things where they will put restrictions on someone's access to the internet. Are there ways around it?
Oh
Sure.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, I'm not some securities IT whiz, but I could imagine them developing an ankle monitor that would restrict the user from using telecommunications or wire any kind of
Yeah,
electronic communication.
I think
I
so.
mean, it might end up blocking out all the electronics in the house, depending on how these things are done. But I mean, there are absolutely bug detectors you can get, so I think you can probably reverse engineer this. But I mean, yeah, because it's what did they get her on? They got her on what is it, criminal mischief or menacing or something like that?
Hmm.
Yeah, these poorly defined crimes, because I think, as we said in the last episode, law is reactive. It's not proactive. Like it doesn't happen because it needs to. Happens because something bad happened and they need to make a ruling
Yeah,
on it. It's not,
yeah.
oh, hey, why don't we prevent this thing from happening?
Well, right. Certain precedents are set,
For sure.
like, yeah, and that comes up a lot in Canadian crime because I feel like they're just a little bit more relaxed about certain things than we are.
Oh,
Uh,
I mean, really, for some of this, for Kaitlyn, I mean, if this were an American crime, based on the fact that she did solicit out of the country and out of her province, out of the state, it would be if it was US, that's automatically a federal crime,
does
isn't
that,
it?
oh, yeah, that would be
Because,
here,
I mean, she
right?
didn't physically cross state lines, but you can get people on wire fraud
Wire
for,
fraud, exactly.
GoFundMe stuff from everywhere.
So,
So I don't know. But it may also, I mean, but if she, for instance, if she'd stayed in one state, if this was in the US, it would be a state case. It wouldn't be federal, I don't think, because there
okay,
was nothing that operated outside of state lines. And that that can be to the benefit of the victims or to the deficit of the victims, depending on what state laws are on the books about what.
Hmm.
So, um, but I don't know. I mean, the very nature of the communications that she used also might have determined some of it. Was she using an iPhone? Was she using voice over IP? Was she using a landline? Was there any video ever involved? I mean, sometimes it doesn't matter and sometimes it does. I mean, I am an investigator. I'm not an attorney. I'm not, strictly an IT professional, but a
All right.
lot of this is a failure of law.
Okay. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, because I kind of want to keep this sort of topical. So, on one hand, a lot of people are talking about this case, particularly in the doula community, as you can imagine. There are some questions that popped up. Someone came onto my Reddit thread about this podcast and said, I'm not a doula, and so I don't understand something. And then this person had a question about, how can you fake being pregnant in person? They were confused on that point. And so maybe they didn't understand. And I think I'm right on this. I don't think she ever presented herself as being full term, where
Mhm.
her belly would be very obvious. But if you're a little bit overweight and you're saying you're in your second trimester, very easy to fake that.
Yep.
And then she really got the pattern and sounds and so forth of labor down so that she could convincingly fool someone that she's actually going through it. And that also feels incredibly devious and weird. This idea that like there's nothing like erotic about like being at a birth. It's just that there's moaning, there's
Wait,
nakedness. What?
something just occurred to me that I hadn't thought of, and I'm so sorry.
What?
The reason why she chose a stillborn, because the baby would move as she was in labor if it wasn't, right? That's why the baby has to be stillborn.
No, that's not why. Because a
Sorry.
doula, that's okay. I mean, it's a good question, but a doula in someone's house doesn't come with a Doppler to measure the baby's heart rate. Is that what you're alluding to, or you think that like somebody would feel the baby moving from the outside of her
I
body?
mean, yeah, I've never seen anybody in labor, so I don't know what it physically looks like. Like, is there a lot of movement? Like, do you notice movement of this? Never? Okay, that's weird.
I mean,
Really not.
maybe if a baby is moving around a little bit, just like it was very arbitrary. If you're sitting there with someone who's pregnant and that baby decides at that moment to stretch or reposition themselves, you'll see like a ripple under the surface
That's
of
what I
the
meant.
skin.
Yeah.
But that's arbitrary. Like that could happen sometimes and not other times.
Okay.
And no doula would be sort of like watching the belly for movement, because of course there wouldn't be any if she had presented this as, I have a stillborn baby that I have to birth.
So I wonder if in her logic, though, that's why she made it a stillborn. Was she just upping the ante of tragedy? Because it seems like there was a lot of that going on too.
Right, right. I do.
But I think it's convenient because, what I mean, a doula you would know, but I mean, I don't know anything. So I'd imagine that maybe since she's probably never been pregnant herself, she might have thought, hey, stillbirth is gonna be even more convincing, which is so sick.
Okay, I can give you a couple of reasons for that. Number one, a second trimester demise. So that is much easier. So, for example, if it was in the first trimester, right, having a miscarriage would be, um, you wouldn't get a doula for that. You would simply start bleeding like you got your period. That would be more
Right.
or less, there could be some discomfort to go with that, but it would be really odd to call a doula for that, right? So,
Yeah, it would just be like, I'm calling out of work. I don't feel great. Yeah.
well, yeah, I mean, it could be. I mean, I had a miscarriage, and I remember thinking in that moment, oh, this is what labor is going to feel like. It was very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it came in waves. So, but I wouldn't have expected to have anybody tend to me because I'm basically passing blood and lining. So there's the
Right. Yeah.
difference. So you take a second trimester miscarriage or fetal demise, and you've got more or less a baby in there. But it's smart to use second trimester because third trimester you would be bigger and it would be more obvious whether or not you were pregnant. So second trimester is perfect. And this was not like a skin and bones woman. This was somebody who could look pregnant. I mean, that's
Yeah,
not that
that's just it.
hard
You
to
can't really
fake.
tell. And there's
You
some
can't
people
really tell.
who,
If you're, yeah.
even if they're tiny, they just don't look like they're pregnant. It's weird. Yeah.
Well, that could be, but I think Caitlin was, maybe considered a little overweight. So that was all right. So
Right.
that's one thing. The fetal demise, when you said up the ante, totally, yes. To call a doula and say, I have a stillborn baby, or I know my baby has died. I was already informed that I'm supposed to go to the hospital to have the baby, but I'm scared. Can you come over and help me? I'm having contractions. Like, if that's the way it was positioned, then the doula has no reason to suspect anything. Although you hear a couple of times in the podcast, like one of them says, yeah, it was weird, like she wasn't peeing a lot because that's something not just women in labor, but any pregnant woman pees a lot. I don't know, she claimed her water broke or something, but she didn't want to change her shorts, like little things like that that were like little like red flags, but not enough for anybody to go, hey, this person is faking it. You know what I
And
mean?
she kept everybody busy. I mean, that was another thing that kept coming up in all the podcasts and all the materials about this case is that, as soon as someone had a doubt, Caitlin would have some other thing that she needed them to
Oh,
do, lift
yeah,
her out of the bathtub,
right.
lots of moving around, lots of changing of different things, which I guess is probably pretty standard for someone who's actually in labor. I would imagine that like one position is comfortable for a minute and then it isn't, and it's horrible. And one moment you're hot, then you're cold, then
You're
you want a bath,
totally
and then
right.
it's yeah.
Yes, you're
I
totally
mean,
right.
she
That is
watched
how it
birth
is.
videos. She was watching them, apparently,
Yeah,
someone had said. So,
yeah.
I
So she
mean,
had a knife in that,
maybe
right.
this is all method acting. I don't know. Someone give her a
It
job on
is. It is
Grey's
kind of
Anatomy or
method
something. She
acting.
can play a patient over and over and over again for hours a day. Those hours, it's like 17 hours. That's exactly what she wants. Put her in a fake hospital bed as a background actor for, one of the many medical shows out there.
But
Hey,
that was
a bunch of them probably shoot in Canada. Sorry.
so that's what makes her thing kind of interesting is that when we talk about other scams, and what I was about to say before was that um, the podcast Scamanda, and that's now been kind of transitioned into a Hulu special. I think it's four parts. Is another story of a woman taking advantage of the kindness of other people, one under the ruse of cancer, as in Amanda's case, and Caitlin's case under the ruse of not just a fetal demise, but she also claimed to have been raped. And there was like a lot of stuff going on that, like you said, kept upping the ante of I'm soliciting support and help. So anyway, so Scamanda is all about money and stuff, all the stuff that she got. Um, Caitlin is so much more complicated because there is no financial gain. And I think we said this last week too. With no financial gain, where is her gain? And
And
that's where
where's the
it's
crime? That's the next
and
question.
where is the crime? Right. Because how do you call fraud when somebody has like willingly come to your house to
Right.
to what? Watch you in fake labor? And so that's like the creepy thing about it because she's just the moaning, the nudity, the touching, the exposure, the certain things that
And
she
her, really,
did.
honestly, it's her reactions to the touching, I think. Like, I could imagine, like, somebody going through this experience, as Caitlyn did, like, engineered this whole thing, but without the sexual component. So I could see this playing out with all of the touching and all of that as an idea of care. But
Totally.
because
Yes.
she makes some of those comments, it kind of throws it into that other category. But,
Absolutely.
it's the problem with law, as I said the last time, is that everything comes down to property.
All right.
If it's someone's property that's being, infringed upon, stolen, property as in time, property as in, I experienced this emotional distress and it translates to this dollar amount. I think that people just look at a case like this and they have no idea what to do with it. Because like you said, I mean, fraud is, I could go around saying that I'm a guy named Dan, right? I could say that, and that's not true, but it isn't fraud. If I
Yeah,
said I'm a
that was
specific
good.
guy named Dan,
Yes.
Dan Schwartz who lives on, 123 Butterfly Lane, that's fraud. I'm pretending to be a specific person that I am not.
I see
If
what
I
you're
just
saying.
say,
Yeah.
I'm a guy named Dan.
I see what you're saying, but it's so interesting. And both of those cases, Kaitlyn and Scamanda, raise so much ire in people. It's so, there are a lot of people, again, I'm like been reading a lot of things on Reddit, people saying things like, what, this is so triggering and offensive to me, mostly because literally everyone has been touched by someone who's had cancer in their
Or,
lives.
or,
I
or
mean,
lost a pregnancy or had a complicated pregnancy or a scary
a,
pregnancy or
a little less so about the pregnancy thing, but definitely cancer. And that makes people watching Amanda get money and this one thing that blew my mind was Chili's, the restaurant. Four restaurants in her area in California donated 20% of their proceeds for a particular day, I think,
yep.
to her. I mean, how do you live with yourself
The
day in and
cognitive
day
dissonance is,
out?
I mean, I lived with somebody who did this. I will say that freely. She was not to the degree of Scamanda. There was no, GoFundMe situation. Mostly she was, scamming doctors out of drugs and me out of time and money, whatever. I think at some point they become what I like to call high on their own supply. Like I think there's a part of them that has to justify it somehow.
Right.
Let me just back up a second. So, for people who don't know, Scamanda was a woman named Amanda in, I believe was it Southern California, Northern California, some part of California.
I
And
don't really know.
for about 10 years, this woman pretended that she had a very rare and very deadly form of blood cancer. And
Right.
over that time, she raised a ton of money, not just within her community and her church community, but I think it extended to, anybody who would donate. So she got, I believe it's 4 years in prison for wire fraud because there was a definite, chain of custody, money, whatever, paper trail, digital paper trail, um, which makes her case a lot easier to try because there's already dollar amounts. I suspected in her case the dollar amount is actually more because of sort of the ad hoc donations that were made in cash, and that's difficult, if not impossible, to trace.
Okay, two interesting things about that. One is that she cataloged everybody who gave her money in her very, very visible blog. So anytime
Oh yeah.
anybody gave her significant money, she put it out there. So it was very easy for people to trace that. So that was interesting.
Yeah. I
But
mean, granted for that,
yeah.
what I think court-wise, because substantiating this stuff, you have to, I interviewed an attorney once who told me how difficult digital evidence is
Mhm.
because you have to trace where it came from if you can, what time it was, there's all
Okay,
kinds of things that happen.
I got it.
But I think they, it's very useful because then you know where to look. Like if
Right.
you've got this, then if you're the IRS or a private investigator, you can find the people and see if there's any kind of record that they have. Because if the only record is a blog, there's got to be more to back that up. I
Yeah, yeah,
mean,
yeah. No, that was just that was the starting point.
yeah,
So, and then if you remember, the way they blew that case open was via the IRS, because
yep.
of course she didn't pay taxes on any of that, and she would just say like, "I was sick. I didn't, I'm sorry. I just that
And
was not."
they take that shit seriously. I mean, that was a full guns drawn
I know,
IRS raid. They
busting
will
down
do
the
that.
door. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's excessive and it's definitely shock and awe. I mean, they do it at 6 in the morning. It's definitely a
They
big
want to
show.
catch, right, they want to catch you off guard so that you don't have time to like dump the laptop or whatever it is that might have some evidence
I
on.
mean, they didn't keep their stuff particularly secured, it doesn't sound like, but th that's really
Because they were never expecting anyone to challenge
yeah.
them.
I mean,
That's the thing.
Caitlyn had all kinds of sort of escape plans, even if they were kind of shitty. I mean, one of them, she just went into a bathroom and ditched the hospital.
I
Like,
know.
what on earth, right?
Yeah,
Like, was she in the gown and everything? Did she run out without her stuff?
probably. I don't know. I
And
mean,
like, what in
she
her
could have
brain
still been in her
resets?
clothes.
Like, it's almost like she's groundhog daying this experience for herself. Like she does this, she sees the distress she causes, and then what does she reboot somehow? And all of that goes away, or she just doesn't care?
No, I don't think she registers that as distress.
Or can
Like,
she
look,
just, is
if
it a
she's
compulsion?
but if she's like got sociopathic tendencies, and again, we're just speculating here, neither
Yes.
of us know, but then she'd be compelled to do this wrong thing because it would make her feel better. And so there might be one corner of her mind that's like, this is a bad thing to do. With sort of like a neurotypical person, you would look at that and be like, oh gosh, I feel guilty, I feel shamed, whatever. But for the sociopathic personality, it's like, yes, I know it's wrong. And that's what makes me feel good. That's what gives me,
Or maybe someone who's just
you said
sadistic. I mean,
high on her own supply.
yeah. It might not be something. I think we tend to pathologize even as lay people. And I get the need to do it, and part of it I think comes from us wanting to distance ourselves from the action. Like we are not XYZ pathology, so we are on this side
Try
of
to
it. But I think
understand, right? But we're trying to, that's the whole thing, understanding the motivation, right?
because we all have these sort of deep human needs that could potentially lead us somewhere like this, but they don't for like 1,000 million reasons. Then you get someone like her where all of it comes together and it's like the perfect storm. Like maybe she's missing the mechanism in her brain for XYZ or who knows what, or maybe she's just sadistic somehow. There was some connection that was formed between things that have now done this, but the end result is somebody who's should be it's in some way I think somehow monitored, not necessarily by law enforcement but by doctors, but because all the reports from the doctors were saying that this is someone who's going to reoffend because she's had all the psychological interventions available and it's not doing it. Like I wonder how long they tried and how good, the Canadian prison psychologists are. I mean, the American ones are, you know, not fabulous,
Questionable.
I don't think. I mean, I have no idea, but I work outside law enforcement. I'm a private investigator. Law enforcement is not
Yeah.
the soup of the day. It's like, what's going on here, what's at work here, what needs to be done here.
Yeah. So, what was I going to say? I mean, uh, Caitlyn, just going back to Caitlyn, yeah, it's obviously she's compelled to do this, and she really is getting something that she needs from these encounters. And it's really hard for her to stop, clearly, because she's been warned, she's been punished, maybe not punished enough, but she really can't stop doing it. Um, and even if someone cuts off her ability, she may just find some other way
I
of,
mean, she's got a bunch of countries she could try. I mean,
I
she did
know,
the
we're right, we're
international route
people,
before,
right.
but I
People might
think, I
not
mean,
know.
hopefully her lawyer will dissuade her from that because that's when it becomes either an international or federal, depending. I mean, if she hits, I think she's got one in the US,
She
which
does. That's part of the, yeah, that's part of the
there may be suits. I mean, there may be a suit
yeah.
filed in the US. I don't
Florida.
know.
I believe it was somebody in Florida,
And
which
then was
was
there Florida and then I think Texas too. I thought
maybe
maybe
Texas, but that was
um,
smart on her part, basically, because the doula community there never heard of her. They don't know the story. But
but
now,
but legally it opens up some doors, I
oh
think.
yeah,
I mean, again, I don't know. I
I
mean, it
think
didn't
so
seem to
too.
impact the case at all that I can tell from. I mean, I don't even know if they could consider that instance in Canadian court. Who knows, jurisdiction wise. But there's one other thing I kind of wanted to shift it away from Caitlyn herself and more toward the reaction of the public against the doulas and kind of wanted to talk through that because as someone who's sort of been on both sides of something like this, I've been the not I have not been a scammer, but I have been an observer of someone going through a scam, but I've also been someone who was impacted directly by something like this.
Yes.
And so really when you're confronted with a horrible story like this, someone's coming to you for some reason, either they're unburdening their heart to you because they care about you and you care about them, or you're seeking a service from a doula or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, you're not gonna your first thought isn't gonna be someone's faking this. Like the first time this
Right.
happens to you,
Right.
you're not gonna think that because why the hell would you?
Right.
You think, oh God, this poor person is going through cancer or is, pregnant with a stillborn baby from an assault. I mean, these are all things obviously that are within the realm of possibility also, and things that we've all either known someone who's experienced, had the experience ourselves, heard about an experience of all of these things usually separately, right? So of course you're not gonna, you're in a position of caring, whether, this is someone or this is you're providing a service. Like your brain's not going to go there. And all of the things that you will have the benefit of hindsight about, you cannot have that before you have the hindsight. There's no way.
Okay, fair enough.
So the people who are seeing this after the fact are only seeing the hindsight and they're like, what the hell? How could you be so stupid?
I
But it's
know.
like
Yeah.
you also think about something like an immersive experience. I'm going to get a little weird here. They had that hugely popular thing called Sleep No More in Manhattan, in New York City, which was, I think it was anyway, it was somewhere in New York, where it was sort of, I think it was an immersive take on Alice in Wonderland. So you would go into these different rooms and there'd be actors interacting with you, and you're having this immersive experience. That was what Kaitlyn was doing. She was having this immersive experience. For her, she knew where all the strings were. But for the doulas, they were just having a genuine experience. But if you think about how immersive Caitlin made it,
Hmm.
it's like she designed it. She was designing it so that she would hit all of the marks, right? Like the moans and the repositioning and this and that. And then you saw what she forgot too, where she forgot to pee all the time.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah,
there are
that's true.
little bits of the role that she forgot. But
Yeah.
it was very carefully engineered. And I think the people that see this after the fact can't know, even if they're hearing about how she had, hospital sounds in the background, whatever, whatever, until you're in that kind of experience where someone is really curating it for you in this horrible way, it's hard to see how real it is because all you see is the after effect and the hindsight. You don't see the experience, and even if you see it as it's happening to someone else, all you're going is sitting there scratching your head like, oh my God, that's insane. What's going on? But this one was so, it's the kind of trick that only works once. Like you do it on one doula, and that doula, you can't scam that doula again.
That's right.
When you have an experience like this, it forever changes your reaction and your assessment of all the experiences that come after.
Well, it sounds a little bit like you are responding to, but I don't think you saw this. I made a post on Reddit. Several people in the doula community responded, and Shauna also responded on that thread, and said, "I'm one of the doulas." Now, I just want to find. Da, 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 da.
Someone says hi.
Hello, little Jujulette.
She wanted to get in my lap, so I picked her up. Hi, V.
Somebody criticized the doulas, and Shauna, who had every right to get angry about that, wrote something back that I want to read to you. So people were asking questions like, what benefit did this give to Kaitlyn, the person
Right,
pretending? Was it
right.
just for care and sympathy? So that's like a question a lot of people have. So Shauna is song pond on here. She says, I'm one of her victims. I want to make it clear that even though the legal system denies the sexual element, that's a large motivator for her. She gets off on the intimacy a doula creates at a birth. So that's interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and then someone comments on that saying it's almost like a kind of molestation. It's like she's a gross old man that touches himself in public. Um,
Yeah, that it's like if some guy lured you to a hotel, you
yeah.
know. like, I could see this being, oh, I'm an elderly indigent man. I'm calling a nurse service to check my prostate or something. I mean, that's a
Oh
little bit
yeah.
more direct, I guess. But like, I guess a guy could have some sort of penile emergency and need pending. I don't want to give people ideas because, like I said, I mean, I don't know if I talked about this in the last one, but I once got a crank call on a suicide hotline. I was volunteering for a suicide hotline, and my first call ever was a fetish call, and I did not know that. And so once I got off the line, I thought, oh my God, this teenager has just taken a bunch of pills. But the person who trained me when I got on the line with them, they said, no, 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 we know this person they call all the time. It's not an emergency. It's because they get off on it. And it was terrifying. I mean, what the hell do you know? You're in a position to believe people. You're in a position to help people who feel like they're not getting help the traditional ways, really. So, yeah.
Yeah, but I feel like that's undermines all the good things that people are naturally drawn to doing, to helping their, you know, to helping everyone, whether it's in a doula community, a suicide hotline, working with the elderly,
And
whatever it is. You
and
just
you
don't
can yeah.
expect,
You can
just don't
continue to
expect
do
that.
it. I mean, there are ways to continue. I mean, I continued to do it until I couldn't, I couldn't with my schedule anymore. But
Right, but didn't
um,
it give you pause at a certain point
it
where like,
did. It did. But when I realized it wasn't real, that was a lot better. Because then there's not some teenager out there, that I've just like spoken with on the phone who's now, about to OD. But I mean, it changes your perspective, but it also puts in place some fail safes a little bit of like, okay, if I encounter this, what do I do?
right,
If I see something that looks like it, how do I proceed? And one of the doulas did this. And I can't remember which one. It was the person who accompanied Kaitlyn to the hospital when the OB said, they did the Doppler and said there's no baby.
yeah,
And the doula was thinking either I can be very kind to someone who doesn't deserve it, or I can be awful to someone
right,
who's
right,
going through something awful. And that's an example of sort of being able to contextualize something and make your decision. And this person made the best decision that they could for themselves at the
right.
time. That's kind of, I think, how you operate after this, if you can want to continue doing the kinds of work or the kinds of whatever it is that was impacted by a hurricane of a human being.
Okay, so I want to read you something. I found the little string that I was talking about.
Okay.
So someone writes, "Am I the only one annoyed? The doula completely ignored so many red flags. She had all this information, yet did call the hospital to confirm. I think maybe it means didn't call the hospital to confirm if there was a patient by that name." So Shauna writes back, "You're not the only one annoyed, but like all the other people who are annoyed, you should likely turn inward and question why you're so lacking in empathy that you
Yeah.
can't understand how people can be manipulated." So that's essentially what you're talking about, this kind of sense of there are people who in hindsight are like, what, why didn't you just do this, and especially people saying that who are not doulas,
Right.
because it's really hard to understand that kind of level of intimacy that goes on in a birth, where like, no, you're not looking for red flags, are you kidding? And even if something seems a little off, there's a part of your brain that will just ride right over that because
Birth is weird things happen, I don't know. Um, I
like
think,
what?
but
What do
yeah.
you imagine happens that's
Oh
weird?
Jesus, I don't even know. I mean, yeah, blood, guts, uh, blood pressure problems, who knows what. But I mean, but
Guts.
probably what's happening here with the people, I think it's so funny because when we tell a story in retrospect, I mean, we're always telling a story is retrospect, but what people listening to the podcast aren't taking into account, and I think it's hard to do this sometimes,
Yeah.
is that when the doulas are recounting these stories, they
Yes.
recount the stories with the red flags held in a different kind of way. Like when you're
Exactly.
experiencing something, a red flag goes very quickly, and they're verbalizing something that's a split second,
Split
with
second.
catching
Exactly.
all of the knowledge that they have now. Like once they realize the game is up, you can't unsee that. And
Yes.
so the people who are learning about this are
Right.
learning about it with the benefit of that hindsight.
I know.
Like,
That's just a
yeah,
tough thing with true crime. I mean,
it's so strange. I think sometimes it's a bit of a failure of human, not empathy, really, I don't think necessarily, but it's also, we're not seeing the story behind the story we're being told. We're not, like, the idea is like stick with them within the story.
I
Like,
know. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
There's that case in Idaho and Arizona, Lori Vallow Daybell and Chad
Hmm.
Daybell. And their what led up to their crimes was a lot of time for which people around them started to see red flags. But there was a lot of pushback on those red flags. You know, when
And
her
also, at least at first, before everyone started dying, it's like, yeah, these people act a little weird, but you don't necessarily think they're going to jump to murdering people. Like,
that's
that's not
right. That's exactly
necessarily a
right.
place you're
Yeah.
going to go, right?
So what's really interesting is that Chad Daybell, and people would often say he was sort of the mastermind of all of this, but anyway, it was a little bit of a perfect storm of the two of them coming together. But Chad was living in Utah, then moved to Idaho. And when he moved to Idaho, he moved near his brother, and his brother's wife was very suspicious of everything he was into. I don't know, suspicious is not the right word. She was just like, what's going on with him? He's like into all this like doomsday stuff and he's prepping and he's telling everyone he had to move from Utah to our area in Rexburg because there were going to be earthquakes and floods and all sorts of natural disasters. Oh, check this detail out. When they were looking for a house, Chad and his wife found a house, but it was near, there's a place in Idaho called Bear World. So it's like a bunch of bears in captivity, but whatever, they get to roam around. And I don't know if
Like,
you drive there or
oh
whatever. It's like a theme.
God.
They didn't want to take that house near Bear World because when it came to the judgment day, all electricity was going to go out and those bears would be roaming free. Can you
I
imagine?
mean, I wouldn't want to live near Bear World because I'd be afraid of the ethics of that. And
Oh,
also,
okay.
bears can climb. So maybe Bear World isn't exactly the place for your like pre-rapture hangout condo, like your pre-rapture crash pad.
Well, whatever. I mean, that was what. So then they ended up getting a house right around the corner from the sister-in-law that I'm talking about. Why am I spacing out on her name? Heather. So Heather Daybell.
Oh,
So
she's been making the rounds on like the Mormon podcasts, I think, Mormon Stories podcast and all that.
oh, you listen to Mormon stories?
I love John DeLynn.
The best.
He's got a
Every
great
interview
voice.
is so, I know he does have like a very like it's kind of good to fall asleep to.
Yeah.
It often
I
comes
really respect
on
him. I really,
falling
really
asleep, but
respect him.
that's not to say he's not interesting, but there's something mellifluous maybe about his voice or the people that he interviews. What's really great about that podcast is he lets people talk. He doesn't interrupt. He really listens. If he interjects, it's like for something sensible that's like,
Right.
relates to the conversation or whatever, or the story the person is telling. But God, that one woman who brought down Warren Jeffs, her story goes on for like hours and hours, and
Yeah,
he,
the episodes are like 3 and 4 hours, and I'm just
yes,
wrapped. It's crazy.
yes, and they're
So
so
hats off to
interesting.
you, John DeLynn. I don't know if you'll ever see this, but if you ever need an investigator, you let me know. So
Yeah,
Utah, yeah,
but
Utah's a nightmare.
did Heather turn up on that show?
I believe
Quite
so.
possibly. Yeah, I can't
I
remember
think
who
she
said
weighed
that,
in.
but
I think she weighed in when they had a group of people talking about Jodi Hildebrandt and Ruby Franke. And I believe that she said it on that because there's a link between the dogma that the Vallow Daybell folks were into.
There's some cases that just captivate me and some that I just couldn't care less about. I don't know why.
Yeah.
There's no rhyme or reason to it, but anyway,
A lot
so
of them are sometimes the
that's
ones
all.
where intervention could have happened and it sort of becomes a case study of what not to do and how to maybe put things in place so it doesn't happen again. I don't
Well,
know.
yeah,
You know?
certainly the parents who like let their kids sleep in their own room while they had dinner when they were vacationing in Spain, the parents from
Oh,
England,
right,
a
right,
little
right, right.
girl.
And that's just
There's
so
there's
crazy.
a
It's
good
like,
case study on like don't do this. Yeah.
but it's also like, what are the fucking chances? Like, that's crazy. That's
What are the
crazy.
chances? It's just inevitable. I mean,
Well,
all
no,
you
but
have to
you
do,
go somewhere, you lock up a house, right? Like you really think someone's going to come steal your kids you're on vacation. Are people like this person must have cased the place. Like that's really the only way that works.
that's exactly right. And was only a matter of time before some creepo would case the place and say, I'm noticing a trend here. People leave their kids in the room unattended and they go and have drinks and dinner.
Oh, they
That's
did it multiple times. Okay, I wasn't sure of that part.
I
Yeah.
think they would do that frequently. And I think that, this weird thing, like I'm going to keep going back and checking. Uh, look,
But
I just,
again, also you're in Spain, you hire some babysitter you don't know, and God knows what happens. It just it seems like it's because like
no,
how many times does this happen? Yeah.
let me tell you what you do. You don't leave the room. That's
Right.
what you do. You don't hire a sitter. You either bring the babysitter with you, and that's her job is to hang out and watch the kids while
Right.
you go and have
Or
dinner.
you take the kids to dinner.
Well, yeah, but it was seemingly late and they wanted to have drinks and whatever. You don't do that. Listen,
Yeah.
I'll just tell you something. My friends in Brooklyn or in the East Village, I can't remember, but it was in New York. They were like, oh my God, this couple in the other building, they're European. I don't know where they're from, but they leave their kids in the apartment with a baby monitor. This is the old school ones, not the ones that you could see, but the ones that were like a walkie-talkie. And then they join us downstairs at the bar and they have a drink. Don't you think that's messed up? Somebody had asked me, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, that sounds really dangerous. I mean, anything could happen."
Yeah, I
So,
mean the things that are happening are more likely slip and fall, turn on the stove, that kind of thing. Like the thing that happened with Madeline McGann is such a once in a, you know. But another thing that's crazy about that case is there's a woman in Poland who is pretty well convinced that she is actually
no, it
that
was
girl.
refuted. They did the DNA. It's not her.
But apparently
That
they
was
didn't.
cool. It was really interesting to think that it was her. She had
But
the thing
then
in her eye.
she's still convinced to this day, I'm pretty sure. There was something about I can't remember, I couldn't follow the whole thing. She had ended up in the US, you know,
I think
in
she went on Dr. Phil.
she did, and she had a handler, not really a handler. She was working with this woman who was a private investigator and also a medium. It was a little, and so there was some dissolution between the two of them, and it involved the DNA, and it was not easy for me to follow. I think it just sounds a little, I'm not sure. So she's still pretty well convinced, but the apparently the parents of that young girl won't do a comparison DNA test. So I don't know. They're probably just sick of all of it and want everyone to leave them alone, would be my guess. But
It's been a long time now, and they've
yeah,
been
and
neutering her. I
it
hate when the parents get, they're the ones under the scrutiny as being the villains there, like the
yeah, I mean, this woman has gone
Ramseys.
to their house. I mean, I think she really does. She's not lying in that she really does think this. It's
Yeah.
looking unlikely. The photo evidence that she has is shaky at best. I mean,
Well, how about the fact that her mother knows that she gave birth to her?
yeah, I mean,
How about that?
I think the kid probably thinks the mom's lying. I've seen this before. I mean, it's
Yeah, can I just say that's a lot of delusion going on there.
that's yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
All
and
right.
however it happened,
I think we need to wrap it up.
yes, we do.